Hello everyone, and welcome to our first watercolor project here on Patreon for my patrons only. And we are going to paint a carrot. And I want to go over the supplies first. Yesterday I posted the line drawing for this project and some instructions on how to transfer it to your watercolor paper. So if you haven't done that yet, feel free to watch this video. I always suggest watching a project all the way through before attempting it. But go ahead and get your line drawing on your watercolor paper, and then you'll be ready to begin. But first, I'm going to go over the supplies that we're going to use for this project. And we're going to be using our split primary watercolors. Now, if you don't have them, I'm going to just talk about what colors we'll be using, okay? So the split primaries are a really handy thing, and what it basically allows us to do is to mix any color that we need with just 6 colors. And it's a great way to learn watercolor mixing and color theory in a very intuitive way. Okay, I highly recommend it. I have a class on Craftsy that's all about this. It's called Luminous Watercolor Mixing. And I will also be doing a techniques video next week on, I believe it's Tuesday, or maybe it's Monday. I can't remember what day, or maybe it's the end of this week. I honestly can't remember right now, but I'll be doing one soon, and we're going to be talking about the split primaries and about making a color chart. But today, I'm going to go over these supplies. So we're going to be using pretty much all of our split primaries for this project. And we're going to start with our cool yellow, which is called Hansa Yellow Light, and it's PY3. And as I talk about these colors, I'm going to put them on my palette. For a palette, I recommend just a little white dinner plate, or even a salad plate. You don't really need a huge dinner plate for this project. And I'm going to start with my yellows at the top. So this is a cool yellow. Any kind of transparent, semi-transparent cool yellow, like the color of a lemon, is going to be fine. So cool yellow leans toward green, okay? So anything that's bright and clear, hopefully transparent, is great. And we'll talk more about these paints specifically in our first watercolor techniques video. Then I have a warm yellow, and it's called New Gamboge. And New Gamboge is the only compound pigment in my split primaries. This one is by Daniel Smith, so was the Hansa Yellow Light, but any brand is fine. And this is a mix of PY110 and PY97, and both of those are very transparent yellows, okay? So warm yellow leans toward orange, all right? For our warm red, which is going to go right over here on the color, this is our color wheel. Think of this as a color wheel, the outside of your plate. This is a beautiful warm red. It's sort of like a warm tomato red. Okay, so warm red leans toward orange. And this is called Transparent Pyrrole Orange. I'm going to put it right here. Just a little squeeze on your palette. And it is PO71. That's the pigment number. Warm reds, I have found, are the hardest colors to find that are transparent, okay? So this one is my all-time favorite. I am never without it. Transparent Pyrrole Orange. It is different from Pyrrole Orange. Okay, Pyrrole Orange is very orange and a little more opaque. It's not good for this purpose. So make sure it says Transparent Pyrrole Orange PO71. Now, mine is by Daniel Smith. It's the only brand that I found that I really like for this color. Okay, if you don't have that, just try to find the warmest red you have. So something that leans toward orange. You're not going to be using a blue red, but a more orangey red. But then we have a cool red, and for cool red I use quinacridone rose, which is PV19. Some brands call it permanent rose, and it leans toward violet. So that's our cool red. And then over here, on this side, we're going to start with our blues. And for our warm blue, which leans toward red, okay, or violet, we have French Ultramarine. This is Winsor & Newton brand. Any brand of French Ultramarine is absolutely fine. This is just what I happen to have handy. So that is our warm blue. And then for our cool blue, I have Phthalo Blue Green Shade. And Phthalo Blue Green Shade leans toward green. It's more of a turquoisey, like a true cyan. So I'm going to put that right here. So now we have our 6 colors on a color wheel. Cool yellow, warm red, warm blue, and cool blue. Cool yellow and cool blue make the clearest, brightest greens. Warm yellow and warm red make the clearest, brightest oranges. And cool red and warm blue, because warm blue leans toward red, okay, make the clearest, cleanest violets. That's all we really need to know for today. So mostly I just want you to have some yellows, some reds, and some blues, both warm and cool. If you don't have those, the 2 main colors we're going to be using are orange and green for our carrots. And so you can certainly find some of those types of colors in your watercolor palette. Okay, so I have it here on my little salad plate. I'm going to put that aside. Just move my paints. So I also have a roll of paper towels that I just sort of flatten out so they don't roll all over the table to wipe my brush. I have a little glass of clean water. And then I have a kneaded eraser. Okay, so any kind of eraser will do, but a kneaded eraser is going to give you the cleanest lifting. Then I have my watercolor paper, and I am using Stonehenge Aqua Cold Press. This is a 140-pound cold press paper. It is 100% cotton. It is size 9 by 12. Any cold press watercolor is fine for this project. I always like to tell you what I enjoy using, but you are free to use any cold press paper that you have. So if I open this up, you'll see that I've already transferred my line drawing onto this paper. So I have this carrot, and I kept it really simple. Just the carrot and the stalks as they come out, and some of the areas where the stalks branch out, where the leaves branch out. So my drawing is transferred onto my cold press paper. Then for my last 2 supplies are my brushes. And I am using a size 9. This is an extra fine Billy Shoal watercolor brush. Any like size 8 pointed round watercolor brush is absolutely fine. All right, whatever you have. And then this is a size 4 Winsor & Newton professional watercolor sable pointed round. So a size 4, even a size 2 would be perfect. If all you have is a squirrel mop, that's fine. You just have to make sure you roll it to a point, and you can get that point really fine for some of the finer work we'll do. Now we're going to do this project in 2 steps. So today we're going to put a base layer and give our carrot some roundness, and get the first layer down on our greenery. And then we're going to let that dry completely, and next time I have a watercolor project video, we're going to complete this project by putting all of the textural marks and fine details. That's how I really approach a painting like this. In most paintings, I work in layers. So I start with the palest layer possible, just to map everything out and get rid of some of the pencil lines. And then I let that dry, and I come back in and I put another layer on to sort of fill out the roundness of the objects, to give it a little more detail, and to bring a little richness of color into it. Then I let that dry completely, and I bring it back for the final steps. So the final steps, that will be in the next watercolor project video. So before we begin, I want to mix up some colors, and that's usually how I work. I mix colors up first. And I just keep this, you know, this is a 1/2 inch flat brush. It's synthetic. I use it to mix my colors. I don't use my good brushes to mix my colors up usually. It saves wear and tear on the brushes, and this is a much more effective color mixer. So we're going to start by mixing up an orange, okay? And if you want to have a carrot near you so you can see the orange of a carrot, that would be really helpful. But basically, you know a carrot orange, it's bright and clear. So guess where I'm going to start? I'm going to start with my warm yellow and put a little puddle of it down on my plate. Now, I want to make sure that I have plenty of water. So if I tilted my plate, it would start to run, okay? That's what I call a juicy mix, all right? Plenty of water. Remember, we want to start on the lighter side of things. So I'm adding plenty of water to this. Do you see that? And really, that is almost the color that I want to begin with, if I think of the lightest shade on my carrot. However, it's a bit more orange than that, so I'm going to clean my brush and dry it off. And I'm going to take the corner of my brush and just pick up a tiny little bit of, oh, and a cat hair, always. A tiny little bit of the transparent pyrrole orange, the warm red, a warm red, and I'm going to mix it in. And it's going to give me this clear, clean, vibrant orange, all right? And that's what we're going to start with for our project. So just that one color. You want a clear, clean, vibrant orange that has plenty of water in it, so it's sort of pale. So before we begin painting, let me just check and see how you're seeing this. Okay, you can pretty much see the whole thing, I think. I'm going to move it up just a little bit while we paint the carrot. So before we start painting, I want to look at my line drawing, and I want to see if there's anywhere where the graphite is a little bit dark and I could lighten it up a bit. And so I'm going to flatten out my kneaded eraser, and I'm just going to press it. Just press it over the graphite. So you might not be able to see the drawing anymore, but it's there. I don't want it to disappear, obviously, but I want it to be as light as possible where I can still see it, okay? And I want to lift up any extra graphite so it doesn't mix with my paint, okay? So sometimes I don't need to do that, and sometimes I do. It just depends. Now, because the carrot's a little bit bigger of an object, I'm going to use my pointed round in a size 9. Quite honestly, a size 8 or size 6 would be better. I just don't have one here. So at the moment, I left it at my studio. So I'm going to wet my brush, and I'm always going to be talking about rolling your brush to a point. What that means is I'm just rolling it on my paper towel. I'm never scrubbing it. I'm never flattening it, because look what happens. I want to always have this nice point. So when I say roll your brush, I mean this. This wicks up any extra water. We never want water on the ferrule of our brush, the metal part. So I'm just rolling it to a point. All right, then I have a brush that's ready to use. And I'm going to start with just sort of sweeping my brush through this orange paint. I'm rolling it in the paint. I'm always rolling my brush because I want it to snap back to that nice point. And when it's really saturated with that paint, I usually roll the tip on the paper just to take some of it out. And I'm going to move my paint over. And then we're going to start applying a base layer of this orange paint to our carrot. We're going to paint the whole thing, all right? This is the lightest value, so any highlights that we have are going to be this color. I'm going to start at the top and move it down. Notice I'm not going right up to the edges yet. I'm going to go about halfway down and leave myself a nice little puddle there. And then I'll be a little bit more careful, and using the tip of my brush, I'm going to take my orange paint to the pencil line. Okay, so I'm just putting down this nice clean first layer of orange. I'm slowing down and I'm paying attention. And then when I want to do this side, I turn my paper around so I can get a better angle at it. Never be afraid to turn your paper. It's really, really important that you learn to do that. It gives you a big advantage because you're always moving your hand in a way that's comfortable to you. Now I'll turn it back around. Just bringing that paint all the way down, picking up a little bit more on my brush. Now my carrot is getting narrower, so I'm going to be extra careful and mindful of where that tip of my brush is. And I'm pulling that orange paint all the way to the bottom, and when I get to the bottom, I'm just going to stop, and then I'm going to turn it around, and I'm going to do the same on this side. Pulling it right up to that pencil line. And don't worry if the edges are a little bit bumpy, because you might even have noticed that the line drawing was a little bit bumpy on the edges. Carrots are not perfectly smooth on the edges. Okay? And once that's done, excuse me. Okay, so once that's done, I'm going to take the tip of my brush and I'm going to pull the orange paint out where I drew this little sort of root that kind of escaped here. So it will be lost a little bit on the body of the carrot, but we're going to surround it with darker paint at another time. And then at the bottom I have the same thing. I want to come down to the bottom and use the tip of my brush, sweep down, and put some of that orange on that little root area. Okay? If there's any places where I feel like I need to clean up my edges, I can do that now. But I'm pretty happy with this. I don't mind a little bit of bumpiness. Okay? So that is my first layer of my carrot. All right. So once that's done, we don't want to touch this again until it's totally dry. All right, so we're going to let this dry. In the meantime, we can start mixing up our green for the carrot tops. I'm going to move my painting aside and bring back my palette. Now, if you have green paint, you can always mix a green, starting with a green paint. That's fine. I like to mix my greens with blue and yellow. So I see, when I look at carrot tops, there are two greens. There's this really kind of bright spring green that's on the stem, and then the leaves become a darker, more leaf green. And so I'm going to mix the lightest value. So I'm going to mix the very light spring green, and I'm going to start with my cool yellow, and once again get a nice juicy puddle of it on my palette with plenty of water. Okay? And then I'm going to dry my brush off, and using the very tip of my brush, I'm going to pick up a pinprick of the cool blue, of the phthalo blue. So if you don't have phthalo blue, ultramarine would be fine. Phthalo is going to give us a brighter green. So I'm just taking a pinprick of this blue on the very tip of my brush. It's a very, very strong pigment, and I'm going to mix it in to my yellow. And you can see it starts to turn it to a green. And I think I want a tiny bit more, so I'll dry my brush. And again, take a pinprick, and I'm talking like the head of a pin, and mix it in right there. Okay? So now I have this vibrant, vibrant spring green, and that's what we're going to start with. That's our base layer. So once again, I'll bring back my painting, and I'm going to turn it this way so the leaves are closer to me. Always make it easier for yourself. Okay, don't fight it and try to paint up here. Make it easier for yourself. Before I paint that, I'm going to take my kneaded eraser again, and remember, I can just lightly tap over my drawing to remove any extra graphite. So I chose a carrot because our garden is just alive right now. We're having so many wonderful fresh vegetables every night, and the carrots are just so beautiful. And everybody knows what a carrot looks like, so it's not so hard for us to imagine. So I'm going to pick up this spring green. Actually, you know what? Let's back up. I'm going to make a little bit more. Hold on. I want to use a smaller brush, and normally I would just dig in with this brush, but it's going to be easier for you if you have a smaller brush. So I'm going to rinse that off. And look at me, I mixed with my good brush. I just told you not to. So when I contradict myself, you can laugh at me. Okay, so because these stems are really narrow, I'm going to switch to my number 4, or even a number 2 would be fine. Okay, let me just, hold on one second. I have my thing here, so in case I have silent mode on my phone, and it's just not working. Okay. So I'm rolling my brush in that green paint, rolling it to a nice point, just dabbing the ferrule if there's any water on it, because I don't want that to drop into my painting. And I'm going to start on the stems. I'm going to paint each stem separately, and sometimes in your drawing it may only look like a line, and that's fine. We're just going to follow those lines. So we're going to start right by the carrot, the orange part, and we're going to paint each stem separately, and we're just pulling that paint along the pencil lines that we created. And sometimes it's just going to turn in to a line, and we're just going to follow that line and paint it. Paint right over that line. So the main benefit of this first step, okay, so I'm going to come down here and start with this one. Just painting each stem separately. So the main benefit for this step, to get this pale wash down, is that we can, when it dries, we can go back and we can use our eraser and we can get rid of these pencil lines so that we can move forward without them. It also provides a little bit of a roadmap for us. So this is a fairly simple painting, right? A carrot. But let's say you have something like a bird, when we do a bird eventually, and that's a little bit trickier. We have many different areas of different colors, and so we want to be sure. You see how I'm just pulling that green paint right over those lines, okay? So we want to be sure that we have sort of a roadmap for ourselves, what color, you know, goes where. And I find it really helpful to begin with this pale layer. Now, if you get a little confused on where your lines are, follow the basic structure of them. You know, every carrot's different, so your carrot may end up looking different than my carrot, and that is absolutely fine. We know what a carrot looks like. We know that it has these frothy little leaves, and so that's what we're painting. So I'll come back down here and I'll start with the next stem that I see. Just pulling that paint with the tip of my brush all the way along. And I keep loading my brush up when I need it, see? Using the tip of my brush, I'm just pulling this paint out and creating a roadmap for our leaves. Later, when we start to paint our leaves in the next step, we're going to make all sorts of frothy little things off the side. But these are kind of the stems that show us the movement of how these leaves grow. See? There's my phone. I keep trying to catch it, but I'm sorry about that. Airplane mode doesn't work. Do not disturb doesn't work. It just makes noise. So see, I'm using the tip of my brush and I'm just pulling these out. Don't, you can paint in some little frothy parts if you want, but really right now we're just getting that base layer down. So I'm going to come back down here again and paint the next stem. Or stalk, I should say, right? I don't know. It's a stem. So if you run out of paint, try to mix more as close to as you can to the original color that you made, but don't fret if it's a little bit different. This first layer is going to get all but covered up, so we don't have to worry. So you might notice that I'm holding my paintbrush like a pencil. I'm holding it really, really close to the tip. Whenever I want control, that's what I do. All right, we're almost there. So now I'm going to start on the very final one, which kind of comes out from behind of this one. There's a little piece that goes that way, that way. And again, all carrots are different. So if you see an extra stem or you forget one, it's okay. We do the best we can. This is all about progress and not perfection. And it's mostly about enjoying ourselves. This is a really fun thing to do. And we don't want to make it stressful. We want to take the stress out of it. Okay? Now I'm going to turn my paper this way now and just start here. So always turn your paper. Make it comfortable for you. It may be more comfortable for you to paint this way. And that's fine. You'll find your own way. But make it easier on yourself and just turn your paper. Always make it easier for yourself. Almost done here. I'm a person who likes to pull my paintbrush toward me, okay? I don't like to push it away from me, and I avoid it as much as possible. I have more control when I'm pulling it toward me, and I don't know why that is. All right, so now we have a base layer on our carrot greens and also on our carrot, okay? So I'm gonna let this dry completely, and then I'll be back to show you the next step. Okay, so my painting is now dry. This first layer is now dry. Give it plenty of time. You really want to make sure that it's dry before we move on. And the first thing we're going to do is take our kneaded eraser, and I just give it a few pulls to make sure it's nice and clean. And that's another benefit of a kneaded eraser, is that it carries the graphite, but when you pull it, you get clean surfaces again. So I'm going to take a clean area of my kneaded eraser, and I'm going to lightly go over all of those pencil lines that are left over. And you'll see that they come up pretty nicely. Sometimes you'll get one that doesn't, but mostly they come up. And so now I'm free of graphite and I can continue painting, but look at that, I have this nice road map of my carrot, okay? All right, so our next and final layer for today, we're going to give our carrot a little bit of volume. Let me just move, I have my line drawing here. Okay, and we're gonna go back to our palette, and we're gonna start with the carrot, and we're going to mix up, actually let's start with the green. Let's start up at the top and then we'll move down. So I'm gonna move this down. So we're gonna mix up a green that's just a little bit darker than this one, okay? So I'm going to go back to that puddle that I had before, and I'm just going to wake it up with some water. And then I'm going to take a little bit more of that cool blue and mix it in just a tiny bit on the corner of my brush. And then I'm also going to take a tiny bit of my warm blue. Okay, a little bit more of each. I don't want this layer to be quite as transparent. I want it a little bit darker. So I'm taking a little bit of both blues. So now I kind of have this turquoisey color. But then I'm going to go back to my cool yellow and add that in until I get a nice sort of leafy green. And then I'm going to mix one other green, and I'm going to start with my warm blue, my French ultramarine, right next to the other one. I always rinse my brush when I'm working with yellows. You don't want to contaminate your yellow. And we're going to add in a little bit of the warm yellow. And you see that gives us kind of a duller green, all right? A little bit more of the blue. And then a little bit more of that warm yellow. So I get sort of this dull kind of almost olivey green, all right? So once I have that, I'm going to take a tiny touch of the cool blue, corner of my brush, and mix it in just to bring some of this color into it. So I have two greens. I have sort of a leaf, just kind of a nice, clear, vibrant, leafy green, and then a duller green, all right? I already have the base layer of this really, really green, like spring green. I'm going to go back to my number 4 brush or number 2 brush, all right? And I'm going to start with the lighter of the 2 greens. And what I'm going to do is any place, okay, that my stems sort of overlap one another, I'm going to put a little bit of this green on. So here, I'm going to start here, and on one side, I'm going to pull down with the tip of my brush this darker green and sort of come down here to meet the carrot. And then toward the bottom of that stem, I'm going to do the same. Just pull down. I'm going to rinse my brush. And I'm just going to use a clean, damp brush to just soften. I'm just pulling the tip of the brush over where I painted to sort of soften that line. It's okay if there's a little bit of a line, but you're just softening it, all right? And this is going to start to give our stems a little bit of definition. Okay. All right, then I'm going to come over to this one. I'm going to start where the foliage starts. I'm going to go down the right side and pull that little strip down again with the tip of my brush, that darker green. And where it meets the other one, I'm just going to put a little bit of darkness there. So where one stem goes behind another stem, it's going to be a little darker. Rinse my brush, dry it off, and just soften what I put down. The tip of my brush. Just soften it. You don't need to totally blend it in because we're going to put a unifying layer later. So go back to this green, and then I'll come over to this stem where it starts to branch out. So at the top of the stem where it starts to branch out, using the tip of my brush, I'm just pulling a very fine line. And this takes some practice, so be patient with yourself. All the way down to where it meets the other stem. And then remember, we want it darker where the stem moves behind, okay? And then we'll come up here about this far, and we'll put a little bit on this stem. And where it goes behind, it's a little darker. So all that did was give ourselves a little bit of definition. I just wet my brush, and I'm just taking a clean, damp brush. I wet my brush, sorry, I rolled it. And I'm just softening. Okay? So now those stems have a little bit of definition. I want my stems to stay fairly light, so that's why I only put a little bit of this darker green. Okay? So now we're going to move up to the frothy parts. And we're going to go up to the tops of our stems first. And we're going to start with that medium green, get it on our brush. And again, we're just going to go over very lightly, just sort of skip around and sort of make it darker here and there. So I'm not drawing a whole straight line, but I'm just sort of, and I'm kind of sticking on the right side. Okay, very fine line, and I'm just pulling it down here and there, skipping every now and then, just to give a little bit more color. Pulling it down. These are very, very fine stems. If it goes behind another one, remember to make it a little darker there. Come all the way up here. See, I'm just very lightly pulling this darker green through where the stems meet the main stem, these little auxiliary stems. You can make it a little darker there. Just make sure you add a little bit of green paint where those stems meet. Okay? Same thing over here. I'll start at the top and bring it down, and where those auxiliary stems touch, I'm just making sure I put some of that darker green. And then a little bit over on this one. So when I'm done with this step, I'm going to take a photograph and upload a close-up photograph for you to see. See how I'm just moving along. So see how it's becoming a little bit darker, but I still see that light green in places, all right? I'm not totally covering it. I'm just pulling it down every now and then. I skip over. And where leaves cross over each other, it's going to be a little bit darker. And this just gives us natural variation. Very, very light touch. Again, this takes practice using the tip of your brush. Don't be afraid to practice this on a scrap piece of paper, just making these fine lines. Okay, so now that's done. Now I want to go back to that same green, the medium green that we made. Okay. And I'm going to turn my paper, and I'm going to start putting some little kind of auxiliary leaves out. Now, this will also take some practice, okay? Don't be afraid to just try it. So what we're doing is we're using the tip of our brush, and I'm just dabbing. I'm just dabbing these, and I'm going directionally. So I'm moving out in different directions. I'm just dabbing. So I'm getting these nice little frothy green leaves. Everywhere where I have a stem coming off, I'm going to do these little dabbing marks. I'm going to stop the video here so I can zoom in on this part. So tip of my brush on the end of each stem, and I'm just putting these little frothy marks. And I'm kind of going out. They go this way from the stem. Dabbing them. Now, as I get to the end of one area, I'm going to pick up some of that darker green that I made. And towards the stem, I'm going to dab in a little bit of this darker green too, here and there. So I've got 3 greens happening now. I've got that first bright spring green that we used, I've got that medium green, and now I've got this darker green. And between the 3, we get a real sense of dimension. See, I'm just dabbing in the direction that those carrot leaves would grow. So they're coming out at an angle from that stem. Just dabbing more of that darker green as those stems meet the center stem. All right, rinse my brush. I'm gonna go back to that first green. Little stabbing marks, like little sort of angling my brush out either direction. I'll do this one. Remember, we're not doing a photographic copy, all right, of anything. We are making marks that give us the illusion of carrot leaves. Grab some of the darker green and go back and add some while that paint is still wet, focusing on the center. Okay? Now, I need to mix up a little bit more of my medium green. So it was the cool blue, a little bit of warm blue. Oh, that was way too much. See? That cool blue is so strong. And then the cool yellow. Sorry, the warm yellow, not the cool yellow. Just to make some of that color up. A little bit of cool yellow. So try to always mix enough paint so you don't run out. I unfortunately did not. So I'm going to do one more in real time, and then I'm going to put it on time lapse while I finish this. See how I'm doing this? You can go right over other leaves. Little stabbing marks. And pick up some of the darker green and drop some of that in. Especially darker if it meets on top of other. Pick up the lighter green again. Lighter green, just putting in those little directional marks. It's really fun, and it can be really meditative once you get into it. Pick up some of the darker green. And I'll do this one more section, and then I'm going to do time lapse to finish this. so you can continue to watch and see how it takes shape. This takes a little time. All right, I'm going to turn off now and then go to time lapse to finish the greenery. Okay, so I've got my first layer down on the greenery. All right, I've put in a couple different colors of green. I've got this nice frothy, very realistic looking carrot top, okay? So that's gonna dry. That's all we're gonna do on this for this lesson. Now we're gonna work on our carrot. I can move this up a little bit. And what we want to do in this layer is we want to put a glaze down and give our carrot some shape. We want to start making it look like it has a sense of roundness. So I'm going to go back to my orange that we mixed before, and I'm going to wake it up, and I'm going to make it a little bit darker. So I'm going to first take a little bit more of that transparent pyrrole orange and mix it in, and I want to mute it out just a tiny bit. So the opposite of orange on our color wheel, orange would be here. Between warm yellow and warm red, it would be here. So directly across is blue. So if I want to mute a color, I'm going to use blue. So I'm going to take the corner of my brush and just pick up the tiniest amount of my warm blue, and I'm going to mix it in to my orange. All right? And then right next to it, I'll just take a little bit more of that warm red. See how it's a little bit muted? And then a little bit more of my warm yellow. And I'm going to make a bright orange right here. So warm red. Warm yellow to give myself a nice vibrant orange. So I have two oranges to work with, all right? So we already have this lovely base layer, and we don't want to get rid of all of that. So we're going to start with a water glaze. And you know what? Hold on one second. I'm going to get fresh water for this. So when we do a water glaze, we want our water to be really clean. So always have a clean glass of water. I say that because it's best practice, but there have been times where I've used my paint water and it was fine. But for best practice, start with clean water. So I'm going to move my palette over a little bit, and I'm going to start by putting a water glaze on the entire carrot, okay, except for that little root that's coming out the side. So clean water on my larger pointed round brush. So this is a number 9, but if you've got an 8, or a 6, that's fine. And I'm putting a clear water glaze on my carrot. I'm being very careful to stay within those painted lines, all right? And oops, I already messed up. So when I get to this little root area, and if you go over it, that's fine, because we can always add darker paint around it later and lift. But you see, I'm just kind of going up to that root area and around it, and then continuing down the carrot. Now, once I have a water glaze all the way to the bottom, I'm going to go back and I'm going to do it one more time. And the reason is I want to make sure I have a nice even glaze. And you don't have to go all the way to the bottom of the root, but just to where the carrot ends. So I'm going to go back, and at the top, I'm going to start again, and I'm going to put another water glaze right on top. And that ensures that I have a nice even surface for my paint to flow. The purpose, I'm avoiding that little root. The purpose of the water glaze is to let our paint flow over the surface, all right? and it will allow us to get really soft shading without any hard lines. So now that that's done, I'm going to pick up the brighter orange, and toward the left-hand side, starting at the top, I'm going to just use the tip of my brush to drop in that brighter orange all the way down the center left side of the carrot. Just dropping it in. So you see it's sort of moving around, and it's not going all the way over here where I have the lighter color. It's sort of staying in the middle, but it's slowly kind of diffusing. I'm going to pick up my darker, more muted orange, and I'm going to start at the top right under where that stem meets, and I'm going to go all the way down the left side. Okay? So now I have this darker orange stopping when I get to that root, picking up underneath it, and moving all the way down. I don't have to worry about going all the way up to that edge. I'm getting as close to it as possible and taking it down using the tip of my brush, just letting it fall off the brush into the water glaze. All right? I'm going to rinse my brush, roll it to a point, and dry it off really well. All right? And then I'm not going to touch this side at all. I want that paint to be just sort of diffuse. But I am going to take the tip of my brush and I'm going to go over this edge, and I'm going to make sure that the paint line is very, very nice. So I'm just moving my brush along the edge, and that sort of wicks that darker paint toward it. All right, there we go. So do you see how we sort of have this illusion of shadow now? All right, so we've got the highlight over here, and then the brightest color, and then the darkest color. It's very subtle, and in the next lesson, we're going to enhance that even more. But this is a great start, okay? If by any chance your paint moves over and you lose this light edge, you can take a clean, damp brush after you've rolled it on your paper towel, and you can swipe it through, okay? If I swipe it through a little bit, it lifts some of that color off. So you can do that if you need to. But if you really keep it, if you have a nice water glaze and you keep it toward the center left, it's going to leave some of that highlight over there, just enough. However, if we need to, we can always clean our brush really well, roll it to a point so it's very dry, and then sweep that tip of our brush through where we want to regain that light area. Okay? All right, so that is all for the first phase of our carrot painting. I don't want to overwhelm you, and my advice would be to try this 3 times. So the first time we do something, we're learning. And the second time we do something, we're practicing what we learned. And the third time we do it, we'll really have a good understanding of the whole process, and our results will usually be so much better. So between now and the next project video, you could try this several times, okay? Practice it. And on your third try, save that one, and then next week we'll be back to put the not next week, sorry, the week after. The watercolor project is every other week. So the next time I have one, we're going to put the one more layer of this sort of glaze that gives it a sense of roundness, and then we'll put all of the finishing touches on. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions at all, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll be happy to answer them. And again, I'm so, so grateful that you're here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I know this is going to be great fun for all of us. Thanks so much, and enjoy it. And please let me know if you have any questions. Until next time.